Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're setting the stage for a really objective, deep dive into a profoundly pragmatic and honestly kind of controversial philosophical lecture on elderly care. We're looking at source material that completely challenges some of our most deeply held societal beliefs about family, duty, and what it truly means to care for the people who raised us.
Okay, let's dive into this. Is it our absolute duty to live with our frail, aging parents? Man, it is a heavy question. Anyone who's been a caregiver knows the immense emotional weight, right? And the pressure involved in making this decision is absolutely huge. But the source material we're unpacking today introduces a pretty radical perspective that completely upends the traditional answers to this question. Think about the traditional ideal of filial piety, that deeply ingrained idea that sharing a single house out of an absolute sense of duty is the highest good. Well, the lecture contrasts this sharply with fundamental human needs. The foundational premise of the source here is that human beings are, at their core, independent entities. We each fundamentally require our own time and space. Because of that, the source argues that maintaining independent spaces, whether that's living apart or maybe just living next door, is actually a way healthier option than forced cohabitation, even when parents become frail.
But, what happens when financial struggles make that kind of physical independence difficult? It's a super common and incredibly stressful trap. A lot of people feel absolutely forced to care for aging parents at home simply because they don't have the wealth to set up separate households or pay for private facilities.
And this brilliantly illustrates the source's practical advice for this exact situation. It breaks it down into 3 clear steps. Step 1, you have to overcome your personal pride and any inferiority complex you might have about your financial situation. Step 2, openly contact your local administrative offices or community centers. And Step 3, transition your parents to community or state care. The philosophy strongly advocates for leaning on society's evolving community structures rather than just suffering in silence at home.
When you neutrally compare home isolation with systemic care, the source argues that keeping aging parents hidden away in a back room, usually because of a caregiver's pride, ultimately burdens the siblings and harms the entire family dynamic. On the flip side, utilizing systemic care like state programs or nursing homes offers the parents vital social connection, new friends, and properly managed medical care that a stressed-out family member simply cannot provide.
The source definitely doesn't mince words about this. Open up. Don't lock them in a back room because of your pride. It's incredibly stark advice, right? It demands total transparency from the family and the complete shedding of the caregiver's ego in order to do what is objectively best for the parent's well-being.
But this brings us to a massive roadblock. What if they refuse your help? What if you try to set up these systems and your parent absolutely refuses to cooperate or listen to your advice?
Section 1. The rule of listening. When to step away.
Now, what's really interesting here is how it introduces perhaps the most challenging paradigm shift from the source material, which is establishing mutual listening as a totally non-negotiable prerequisite. According to the lecture's strict logic, you simply cannot help someone who won't listen to you. If a parent ignores their child, the child is entirely powerless to assist them. This stubbornness just creates mutual suffering. Interestingly, the source notes that outside caregivers, often called domi in Korea, are frequently listened to way more than the children themselves. Why? Precisely because they don't have all that complicated family history.
Which leads directly to this. If they don't listen to you, leave. The source presents this not as an act of cruelty, but as a highly declarative, unavoidable, pragmatic necessity. If the mutual listening is broken, you must physically step away.
Naturally, you're probably asking yourself right now, but won't society judge me for leaving an ailing parent? It's a completely natural, empathetic reaction to such blunt advice. We all fear being judged by our peers or being labeled a bad child, but the lecture actually meets this emotional fear with cold, structured logic.
The response is quite simple. Let the critics step up and help instead. The source dictates that you must clearly and transparently state your inability to help a stubborn parent, and then you just leave. Often, the very people criticizing you, like other siblings, relatives, or those judgmental neighbors, might actually be forced to step in and help. And surprisingly enough, your parent might actually listen to them instead of you.
Section 2. The inevitability of natural law.
This shifts our explainer into the broader philosophical framework used to justify these seemingly harsh separations. The source defines natural law, or Jaionui Ichi. Basically, this is the inherent principle that individuals who cannot communicate or listen to each other must separate. If they try to force the proximity against this natural law, they'll face inevitable disaster. The lecture views forced closeness without mutual understanding not just as a bad idea, but as a literal violation of nature's rules. Let's move to and see how this builds directly into the next concept, the law of connection, or Jungbub. This is the idea that human connections are granted to us so that they can be actively managed, not just blindly endured. Mismanaging these connections by being stubborn and refusing to separate creates a hellish environment for literally everyone involved.
When you manage connections properly, meaning they actually listen to your advice, you stay and help, but if you mismanage those connections, meaning they ignore you, but you keep forcing the tie out of guilt or societal pressure, well, the source predicts it will inevitably lead to a much more painful, disastrous separation down the line.
Section 3. Moving beyond emotional attachment.
So the crucial point is getting to the core dichotomy from the lecture regarding affection versus duty. On one hand, we have Jung, a deep Korean concept of affection, which the source frames in this context as blind emotional attachment or choosing to suffer together out of sheer guilt. Contrasting that is right action, making pragmatic, healthy choices, even if they seem incredibly cold to outside observers.
You don't live by affection, you live by right action. This quote powerfully summarizes the entire philosophy we've explored today. True care, according to this source, sometimes means enforcing strict boundaries rather than enabling a dysfunctional, mutually destructive living situation. And we're going to leave you with this final, provocative question to reflect on. Are you managing your connections, or are you just trapped by affection? Think about your own relationships and the boundaries you might need to draw. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time on The Explainer.